Mom, check my bag. I couldn't go on the school trip I was so excited about.
About 14 minutes after seeing my daughter, Emily, off to her school trip, she unexpectedly returned home and burst into tears, saying that shortly after I sent Emily off on her school trip, I received a call from her class teacher. Being told it was an emergency, I was startled, thinking something might have happened to Emily. About 5 minutes after I got off the phone with her teacher, just as the teacher had said, Emily came back home. The reason Emily came back home was something in her backpack. When I checked, I found that her brand new change of clothes and other items were wet and discolored. I found out that my mother-in-law, Mary, had gone to the school and done something. Not to complain, but my relationship with Mary is bad, and she even disliked Emily, so there's no way she would have gone to see her granddaughter off. I immediately called Mary, furiously demanding an explanation. Then Mary said that it wasn't fair for only Emily, one of her 2 granddaughters, to go on the school trip. She thought it would be too sad for the other granddaughter who couldn't go. Mary justified her actions as delivering justice to Emily, insisted she did nothing wrong, and abruptly hung up the phone. Unable to contain my anger, I reported the incident to a certain person. As a result, Mary ended up provoking the wrath of that individual, leading to her own downfall. I am a housewife in my 30s. I have a daughter with my husband, who is in the same age group as me. Emily, who turned into a 6th grader this year, has been looking forward to her school trip for quite a while. Since kindergarten, Emily has been practicing rhythmic gymnastics, and sometimes she demonstrates her skills as an example during gymnastics in her physical education class. Emily, who once appeared in the local newspaper for participating in a competition, has become somewhat of a local celebrity. Once a year, there is a showcase in physical education class where each student presents his or her own creative gymnastics routine. When the time for the showcase arrives, it's so popular that students from other classes also come to watch. Despite her popularity, Emily has never been overconfident or boastful about it. Whenever asked for help, she willingly spends time with her friends, offering advice and assistance until they are satisfied. I'm grateful she has grown up to be such a considerate person. My husband and I married for love, but since the beginning of our marriage, it's been a series of never-ending problems. The issues aren't with my husband, but rather because of Mary's behavior. She believes I stole her precious son and has been causing trouble for me because of it. Initially, Mary, in exchange for accepting our marriage, demanded that we live with her in the family home as a condition. My husband had moved out of his family home to live alone when he went to college, and I was in a similar situation. Therefore, we had decided not to live with either set of parents, but to live on our own instead. Of course, we agreed that if either of our parents ever needed care or assistance due to health or other reasons, we would discuss and address the situation then. Given our perspective, we communicated that we couldn't immediately agree to the matter of living together. We could have declined right away, but we were concerned about upsetting Mary and worsening our relationship with her. Then, my father-in-law, who was present at the time, spoke up, saying that it would be too harsh to expect the young couple to live with the in-laws. He proposed that it would be better to let us live alone for a few years, offering us a lifeline in the situation. Taking advantage of that, my husband skillfully convinced Mary, and at that time, the discussion of living together was dropped. After we got married, Mary kept bringing up the idea of us living together. Usually, if a parent-in-law wants to live together, he or she at least tries to be pleasant to his or her daughter-in-law, but she was the opposite.
You're young and a housewife. Must be nice. When I was your age, I worked part-time to help with the finances. I bet you keep the house immaculate. Then what's this mess?
She would come over when my husband was away, find faults in everything, and leave after criticizing. When my husband was out on overnight business trips, she would stay over, claiming it was too dangerous to go back at night, forcing me to endure her endless sarcasm. I developed mild neurosis due to her excessive interference. When my husband realized it was because of her, he confronted her firmly, assuring me we would never live together. Thanks to my husband and father-in-law, they kept her at a distance, and I started to recover. Soon after, I found out I was pregnant. I was anxious about her meddling again, but she was preoccupied with my sister-in-law, Kate, who was also pregnant at the same time, and showed no interest in me. She ignored my pregnancy and birth, favoring Kate and giving her grand gifts, while barely acknowledging ours. Years went by peacefully. Our daughter grew up to be strong, honest, and full of justice. Mary believed that our not living with her precious son was my doing, that I had brainwashed him. As our daughter grew and resembled me more than my husband, at family gatherings, Mary would cold shoulder her. In contrast, she adored my niece, who looked just like Kate as a child. She would give gifts to my niece for Christmas, but not to Emily. My father-in-law would secretly give one to Emily, but if he's caught doing so, she would snatch it away, saying,
I won't give anything to the child of the woman who stole my son.
When confronted by my husband or father-in-law in front of the kids, she dramatically claimed we were all ganging up on her. Emily gradually realized she was disliked by her grandmother. But she never became resentful. I'm so grateful for how well she's grown up. Just before Emily's preschool graduation, Kate got divorced and took custody of her daughter. The divorced Kate, along with my niece, moved in with my in-laws. My niece then ended up in the same school district and elementary school as Emily. They were in the same grade. My niece and Emily are in different classes, yet my niece often comes to see Emily. She frequently borrows school supplies and personal items that each student is supposed to have. I realized this because Emily's stationery was running out unusually fast. I initially suspected it might be bullying, with her things being hidden or thrown away, but it wasn't the case. Naturally, if two people share something, it runs out faster. I was relieved to learn it wasn't bullying, but I couldn't shake off this nagging feeling. I wondered if this was also a form of harassment from Kate. Mary didn't like me and Emily, often making our lives difficult with her constant nagging and harassment. Especially after Kate got divorced and moved back in with my in-laws, there were frequent incidents that seemed like she was contacting me just to make snide remarks.
How can someone as impressive as you be my brother's wife? You'll definitely be dumped eventually.
Kate seems to think highly of herself as a capable woman. Despite her own failed marriage, she would go out of her way to tell me that I too would inevitably be left by my husband. As irritating as it was, I tried to ignore her, thinking she was just envious of our seemingly happy family. However, the thought of her extending her spiteful behavior towards Emily was something I didn't want to consider. I told myself that I might be reading too much into it. This decision of mine would unexpectedly lead to consequences, but that was something to unfold a bit later. Time passed, and Emily became a 6th grader. In the 6th grade, there's a school trip. Emily had always been excited about it, especially each time she brought her savings for the trip to school. Now that she had reached the grade when the trip would finally happen, we frequently discussed where they might go in our conversations as a family. When it came to my own school days and my husband's, our daughter became curious about our school trip experiences as soon as the schedule and location were decided. Once our daughter brought home a note from school asking each family to prepare for the upcoming school trip, she and I began to prepare little by little. While she was excited and upbeat, I felt a bit worried. Recently, there had been an incident in her class, and the parents of the children involved were called in. Emily often remarked, "Why are the boys in my class so foolish?" showing her concern about the misbehavior of some rambunctious boys. By 6th grade, it's common for girls to start showing physical changes, and some more developed girls even start wearing training bras around 4th or 5th grade. Emily, being an active gymnast, had a muscular build, so her chest area wasn't particularly mature. However, the school trip guide for parents mentioned being cautious about underwear, as the trip involved several nights' stay and girls would be in separate rooms from boys. It also advised that girls not used to wearing bras should start getting accustomed to them. The guide also contained information about menstruation. These letters from school would inevitably be read by curious children. It seems that some mischievous boys reacted to the words period and bra and started teasing girls who were more physically developed, or harassed them out of sheer curiosity. I had already talked to Emily about the changes her body would undergo as she grew older. Even before the school brought up the issue of underwear, her gymnastics club had discussed it, especially since gymnastics attire tends to be form-fitting, highlighting body lines. The club's discussions included care for girls as they approached puberty. So, I had already taught Emily about the individual differences in growth, and that it's wrong to tease others about their bodies. Emily, who has a strong sense of justice, defended the teased girls and called out the boys' bad behavior. One of the boys, whose father was a city council member, complained to his dad about a sassy girl standing up to the boys. This led to a major fuss at school, with the parents of the boys' friends demanding that the parents of the outspoken girls be called in. However, since there had already been issues with boys teasing physically developed girls, the parents' demands were not acknowledged. The parents of the teased girls even threatened to report the matter to the school board if it happened again, which led the school to adopt a stricter stance towards the boys and their parents. As a result, Emily became even more popular among the girls, seen as a brave and reliable ally. However, when out of their parents' sight, kids can sometimes commit acts that would put even adults to shame. I was really on edge about whether Emily would face any revenge from the boys' group she had a conflict with. Though the teachers, including the homeroom teacher, promised to keep an eye out, my worries didn't just disappear. Contrary to my anxiety, Emily seemed unconcerned, treating it as a thing of the past. We spread out the shopping for the field trip over several days. We couldn't do it on the days Emily had her rhythmic gymnastics classes. During one of these shopping trips, I unexpectedly ran into Kate. At first, I thought I could handle just Kate, but then Mary showed up from inside the store. They were shopping together, but Kate had left the store first out of boredom while Mary chatted with a salesperson. So I ran into Kate first, and shortly after, Mary joined us.
Good timing. I heard your daughter's a star in her rhythmic gymnastics class.
I don't want any favoritism towards my grandkids. Since your daughter attends that gymnastics club, I want both of my granddaughters to join.
But I'm a single mom, so naturally, you'll cover the fees.
She even demanded I do the driving. Why should I have to do all that? When I firmly refused, Mary accused Emily of bragging.
That cheeky daughter of yours must have bragged to her, who's in another class.
Don't look down on us just because I'm a single parent. Saying we can't afford extracurricular activities because we don't have a father figure belittles us.
I generally avoided any interaction with Mary and Kate. They demanded I pay the gymnastics fees and drive as compensation. Emily denied saying those things, but Mary yelled, "Children should not butt into conversations between adults." Emily, holding back her frustration, tightly gripped my hand. I couldn't let Emily endure this alone. I said we'd discuss it with my husband and decide. I trust Emily. She wouldn't say such things. I promised to speak with my niece to hear both sides. Announcing that we'd talk to my niece and make a decision, Mary and Kate seemed panicked at the prospect of my husband getting involved. Seizing the opportunity, we left. Once home, I hugged Emily. "I'm sorry for making you go through this," I repeated. She reassured me it wasn't my fault, but deep down, I knew my strained relationship with Mary was a factor. Even if it was caused by Mary's thoughtless words and actions. I briefed my husband when he got home. My husband informed my father-in-law about the situation, and it turned out that Mary and Kate, who were at their family home as well as his niece, were all concerned about what's happening. But I knew Mary and Kate wouldn't be easily deterred. Despite the difficulties, the day of the eagerly awaited school trip arrived. Despite checking everything the night before, I still asked Emily if she forgot anything. With a smile, Emily reassured me, "It's all good, Mom. We've checked everything together several times," and then she left the house with a light step. It's just about a 5-minute walk to the school. The kids were traveling by chartered bus, stopping at rest areas on the way. While doing household chores, I kept glancing at the clock, thinking, she must be boarding the bus by now, right? It's almost time for them to leave on schedule. I just couldn't help but worry. I was reminiscing about how, when I was Emily's age and went on my school trip, my mother must have felt the same way after sending me off, oblivious as I was, having fun with my friends. Just as I was lost in these thoughts, the house phone rang at an unusual time. Just 14 minutes after Emily left, I received an unexpected call from her teacher. When I was told something unexpected had happened, my heart raced, fearing Emily might have been in an accident. But as I listened to her teacher's relatively calm voice, I began to understand the situation. Emily had to come back home due to some circumstances. If I could quickly replace some items in her bag and drive her to a specified station, she could catch up with the chartered bus. After thanking the teacher for their thoughtful consideration and hanging up, I quickly found suitable replacements for the items she was supposed to take on the trip. As I was in the middle of changing clothes, Emily returned home, crying. I knew some of the details from the teacher, but seeing Emily's state was different from what I had been told. Just 14 minutes earlier, she had left the house looking bright and energetic. The only difference now was her tears instead of a smile. I asked her what happened, and she told me to look inside her backpack. When I checked, I found the interior slightly damp, though not enough to seep through to the exterior. The backpack, originally waterproof, had been further sprayed inside by my husband, anticipating any unforeseen events. Fortunately, only the inside of the backpack was wet, as the waterproofing held up, affecting only the items that weren't waterproof. Emily, crying, told me that Mary had come to see off her cousin and had poured juice into her backpack. Aware that her own grandmother didn't like her, Emily assumed she had come to see off her cousin, not her. So, engrossed in conversation with her friends from the same group, she didn't notice Mary standing behind her. It was her friend who was talking to her that noticed and said, "Hey, there's an unknown old lady touching your backpack." By the time she turned around, something had already been put in, and when she checked, she found the inside of her backpack was wet. Emily, understandably upset, confronted Mary, but she dismissed it as an accidental spill and left. I reassured Emily, telling her I would speak to Mary and encourage her to reset her mood and enjoy the school trip. I prepared a smaller backpack I normally use, filling it with substitutes for the original items and new spare clothes we had bought as reserves. Emily, regaining her spirits, helped me pack quickly, and we hurried to the car to drive to the designated station. We arrived before the bus, which had been caught in a bit of traffic. The bus made a special stop just for her, which we were grateful for. Emily boarded the bus, was greeted by her friends, and waved at me multiple times as she set off on the school trip. After watching the bus Emily was on disappear from view, I returned home, and before finishing up the remaining household chores, I called Mary to protest. I knew getting emotional would play into her hands, so I had to stay calm and composed while making my protest. Before picking up the receiver, I took several deep breaths. As I called her, Mary answered after a couple of rings. I calmly demanded an explanation for her actions with Emily's backpack.
She's one of my 2 granddaughters, and it just seemed so unfair for only one to go on the trip. I thought you wouldn't listen to anything I said, so I wet the items in her backpack to prevent her from going. Isn't it your lack of concern to blame here? Shouldn't you realize that?
What was this woman saying? That was my reaction upon hearing Mary's excuse. But as infuriating as it was, I knew calling her names would mean losing the argument. I tried to stay calm and counter her words. But then she abruptly ended the call, claiming she had to go out. I wasn't even aware that my niece couldn't go on the school trip. I generally avoided any interaction with Mary and Kate. How could I have known? Moreover, Emily hadn't mentioned anything about her cousin not being able to go. There was no information about any illness or injury, and even though my relationship with Kate wasn't good, if my niece had been sick or injured, my husband would have heard about it. My husband would have surely shared such information with me, at least for the sake of keeping me informed. The anger inside me was boiling, and just then my niece called. She confessed to feeling envious after seeing how excited Emily was about the trip. I generally avoided any interaction with Mary and Kate. However, she was told by her mother that she couldn't go because they hadn't made any payments for the trip. Mary, upon hearing this, decided that since my niece couldn't go, it would only be fair if Emily also had a painful experience. She had said this the night before, but my niece never thought she'd actually prevent her from going. My niece apologized to me. It turned out she didn't know they weren't making payments. Kate had told her that the trip was fully paid for and that she didn't have to worry about anything. So, my niece believed what she was told, but as the school trip drew near, she was confronted with the fact that no payment had been made. What a cruel thing for Kate to do. There were children in Emily's class who, for various reasons, couldn't attend the trip. When I was a child, there were also kids who didn't participate in school events due to illness or religious reasons. I had told Emily not to ask such children why they weren't going. I assume my niece's teacher, trying to be considerate, didn't pursue the unpaid fees for the school trip. If they had, my niece would have questioned it, and my father-in-law, who lives with them, would have noticed. I couldn't forgive Kate for imposing such a burden on her child. I had been avoiding them, but this time I couldn't just let it go. I decided to take action, not just for my niece, who had apologized to me, but also to give them a piece of my mind. I reassured my niece that it wasn't her fault and that this was an adult problem. That evening, when my husband came home from work, I explained everything that had happened. He immediately contacted my father-in-law, and we shared the whole story. My father-in-law, still working and in his late 50s, regretted not noticing the issue with the trip and apologized. He was quite shocked to learn that no payments had been made for the school trip. My husband was furious that Mary had gone to such lengths to harass our daughter at school. He apologized to me, regretting that he could have adjusted his schedule to drop our daughter off at school, thinking that if he had been there for the send-off, he might have been able to stop Mary's wrongdoing. It's hard to imagine Mary, who had never been involved in school events, would show up for a send-off. The resolution left a lot to be desired. However, my father-in-law wasn't done yet. After our conversation, he woke up Mary and Kate to give them a piece of his mind. This lecture apparently went on until the early hours of the morning, leading them to call us before dawn as a form of retaliation.
How do you like being woken up? Because you snitched to Dad. Mom and I got an earful of nagging from him.
I'm too sleep deprived to do any housework, so you come here and make breakfast. It's only fair since you acted all self-righteous and told on us. What an incompetent daughter-in-law you are.
However, I had only answered the phone out of reflex to the ringing and was half asleep throughout their complaints, eventually falling back asleep. Seemingly taking my mumbled responses seriously, Mary thought I was coming over to make breakfast and didn't prepare anything for my father-in-law. This led to him getting upset, wondering if his lecture hadn't been enough, and rushing to make breakfast himself. In her haste, she made extremely salty scrambled eggs, and my father-in-law apparently commented that a wife who can't even make proper eggs and only knows how to get others in trouble is useless, almost like declaring a divorce. My husband thinks that this incident has finally gotten to Mary, and she might quiet down for a while. I hope so. Given all the times Mary has caused trouble, I wonder if just the threat of divorce would be enough to calm her down. But in reality, as my husband predicted, there were no more sarcastic calls from Mary or Kate, and we had peaceful days until Emily returned from her school trip. She couldn't stop talking about her trip, and during dinner, I had to remind her to either eat or talk. She excitedly shared her experiences, with gestures and all, right up until bedtime. She had only a limited amount of pocket money for the trip but still bought souvenirs for us. She even thought of her cousin who couldn't go. Emily had noticed her cousin's absence and asked why. The teacher, not revealing the true reason of unpaid fees, simply said she fell ill suddenly. Hearing this, Emily bought matching keychains in different colors for her. I told her that her cousin was feeling better and would be back at school. I believe sometimes it's okay to tell a kind lie for someone's sake. A few days later, my father-in-law called us for a talk. The revelation about the unpaid school trip fees led him to contact Kate's ex-husband. My father-in-law had been unaware of their divorce's reason. He apparently avoided the issue because he felt it was a matter between the couple. However, seeing the financial struggles of Kate and Minnie's, he reached out to see if the ex-husband could contribute even a little in child support. The truth he learned was far different. The divorce was due to Kate's terrible spending habits, which her ex-husband couldn't tolerate any longer. He had initially planned to take custody of Minnie's, thinking Kate was incapable of single parenting. However, she adamantly refused to let go of her daughter, so he gave up custody in exchange for the divorce. He was desperate to leave her. The ex-husband had been faithfully paying the agreed child support, including separate amounts for school fees. Learning that his daughter missed the trip due to unpaid fees was a devastating and infuriating revelation for him. My father-in-law, too, had been concerned about my niece's lack of school supplies and worn-out stationery, and had given money to Mary to buy new ones. But Mary squandered the money on outings with Kate. Kate also spent the child support from her ex-husband on herself, not on my niece. My father-in-law asked my niece how she managed at school without the necessary supplies. She replied that she was told to borrow from Emily. It all made sense to me then. For a while, I had noticed the contents of Emily's pencil case becoming sparse. She said it was because she and my niece were using them together, but maybe she was actually giving them to her cousin. Perhaps after being asked to borrow supplies so many times, she just started giving them away, like a pencil here and there. Hearing about the true nature of Mary and Kate from my niece, and learning about the misuse of child support and their refusal to let her participate in school events, made me realize it was not good for her education. Realizing that being around adults like Mary and Kate was also not good, my father-in-law, after confirming with Kate's ex-husband, supported the idea of fighting for custody. If one party is stubbornly resistant, such disputes can automatically lead to court. Kate resisted because she didn't want to lose the child support, resulting in a court case. The court judged that she was incapable of parenting, considering her income and lifestyle. After the divorce, Kate neither worked part-time nor used the child support and money from my father-in-law responsibly. The custody battle was quickly settled in court, and my niece was taken in by her father. He had moved back to his parents' home. She will now live a life free from neglect, with the support of her paternal grandparents. Following their quick loss in court, Kate and Mary showed up at my house.
You really went and did something unnecessary. Now you're going to have to give me my allowance.
It was a good source of income. Ever since you married my son, it's been one misfortune after another. You're a jinx.
They had invaded our home early in the morning, rummaging for valuables, I immediately called my father-in-law for help. He arrived, apologized to me and my husband, and took them away in his car. Later, finding themselves without any source of income, they tried shoplifting at a local supermarket and were caught and handed over to the police. They didn't want to ask us for help and couldn't reach my father-in-law at work, causing trouble for him at his job. Eventually, my father-in-law, fed up with their antics, divorced Mary. He left the house to them, choosing to live with us, as he had always been fond of Emily. Mary took as much as she could from the divorce settlement but spent it all without thinking of the future. Even though they could shelter from the rain and wind, their electricity and gas were cut off, and eventually, even their water supply was shut off. When they ran out of cash even to buy food, she came begging to me, asking for forgiveness and pleading for my help, apologizing for everything they had done. "Let's all live together happily as a family," she says, but what does she mean by happily? Weren't they the ones who trampled on my efforts to live harmoniously? Don't they even think about earning their own money to buy food? I can't offer a place to live to those who won't even try to be independent, so I kicked them out of the house. They banged on the door for a while, but eventually, the police came due to a neighbor's call and gave them a warning. Having already been interrogated by the police once, they probably thought it'd be bad to get caught again and finally left. After that, they never came begging to us, but I heard they racked up a lot of debt from shady sources and didn't even try to work to pay it back. Their former house was plastered with demands for repayment, and at one point, loud angry voices could be heard, but now it's quiet, and I've heard neither Mary nor Kate have been seen. I don't know and don't want to know where they are or what they're doing. My niece has been taken in by her father and had to transfer schools. But she and Emily still keep in touch through letters and calls. They seem to enjoy their conversations. My husband and her father, now finding common ground, have been exchanging parenting tips through emails. They're even discussing taking the girls on a small trip together. I just hope for a brighter future for both my niece and Emily.
You're lying about needing to stay in the hospital longer. You just want to avoid doing housework. Why don't you hurry back and make yourself useful to me?
The first thing that greeted us when we entered Emily's house was Ken's incredibly vile shouting. Even though Emily just gave birth and her body has yet to recover fully, Ken was mercilessly yelling at her. It was a terrifying sight.
Just lay the baby down somewhere. You should be thinking about me first. Get to taking care of me right now.
Ken had forcibly brought Emily home from the hospital, where she had been staying due to her slow recovery. He continued to hurl abuse at her, even though she looked pale and was on the verge of collapsing. Emily, holding her newborn baby, was made to sit on the hard floor, unable to resist. For a moment, I was stunned by the scene, but I couldn't stand by any longer and rushed over to Emily.
Stop right there.
Just as I was about to reach Emily, her mother-in-law, Sarah, who had come to visit her house with me, shouted and blocked my way. What was this? Were they planning to torment Emily together? I couldn't let them put Emily through this any longer. I brushed Sarah aside and tried to hug Emily. At that moment, with a demonic expression, Sarah shouted, "Enough already," and raised her fist. She was going to hit me. I covered Emily and closed my eyes. The next thing I heard was a dull thud as something fell to the ground. What was that sound? Fortunately, it seemed we hadn't been hit. I cautiously opened my eyes, and the sight that met my eyes was beyond anyone's imagination. An unexpected person had come to our rescue. Sarah, still fuming with anger, stood frozen in shock, while Ken looked on in disbelief, and Emily trembled in fear. Seeing this ghastly scene in front of me, I gasped. My name is Amanda. I married my husband 30 years ago, and we built a house in the city, as it is convenient for both our commutes. Even after giving birth to our only daughter, Emily, thanks to my husband's support with housework and childcare, I was able to balance work and family life. Though we were not wealthy, we raised Emily without any difficulties and built a peaceful home. Emily got married a few years ago and now lives in the suburbs, far from our home. With our child-rearing days behind us and the mortgage paid off, my husband and I spent our days planning our early retirement and enjoying our time together. Meanwhile, Emily and her husband, Ken, bought a house in the suburbs and were working hard as a dual-income family. Although we didn't see them often due to the distance, we trusted Ken completely. He had a gentle nature and took great care of Emily. When he visited to introduce himself before the wedding, the tender look he gave Emily left a strong impression on me. He had a completely opposite personality to Emily's straightforward nature, and we often laughed, thinking he would probably be a husband who would be under her thumb after marriage. We were eagerly awaiting the birth of a new life. Every day was filled with happiness. But one day, everything changed with a phone call from Emily.
Mom, I'm worried if I can build a proper family once the baby is born.
Her voice over the phone sounded weak and a bit frightened. As I listened in detail, I learned that Emily's life was far different from what we had imagined.
You've worked hard all this time, so now take care of yourself and spend time with the baby in your belly.
Happy with her husband's words as she entered the final stage of pregnancy, Emily quit her job and started preparing for the birth as a stay-at-home mom at his request. However, after those words, his personality suddenly changed, and his kind demeanor vanished as if it had been a lie. He began to throw heartless words at Emily.
Who do you think you are, lazing around every day and not doing any housework? Whose money do you think you're living on?
Ken shouted mercilessly at Emily, who was suffering from severe late pregnancy morning sickness and back pain, unable to move as she wanted.
Pregnancy isn't a disease. You're just exaggerating because you're a little tired. You just want to skip out on housework, don't you?
Emily couldn't keep quiet and repeatedly argued back, explaining the symptoms that occur in late pregnancy, seeking his understanding, but Ken wouldn't listen at all, instead continuing to berate her, drowning out her words.
I work all day and I'm tired. Hurry up and prepare dinner. Bring me change of clothes. Haven't you filled the bath yet? Stop being so lazy.
With her hormones in disarray from the pregnancy and being subjected to her husband's heartless tirades every day, Emily became trapped in negative thinking, constantly expressing fears about the future. This was a side of Ken we couldn't imagine from the kind person we knew. However, Emily's trembling, tearful voice was undeniably genuine. I repeatedly urged Emily to divorce and come back home, but she decided to endure a bit longer, hoping her husband would return to his kind self after the baby was born. Perhaps she couldn't forget the kind husband he once was. But I couldn't leave my precious Emily and grandchild with Ken, who had such a drastic change in personality. Thinking this, I encouraged Emily to seek help from Sarah, who knew Ken the best. Emily's father-in-law, Tom, had already passed away, but Sarah was still alive and lived near the couple. I believed that Sarah, having experienced pregnancy and childbirth herself, would surely side with Emily. However, Emily said, "Sarah told me I could always consult her if I was in trouble, but she hasn't contacted me once since I got pregnant." This only deepened my mistrust of Sarah. Could it be that Sarah was aware of Ken's wrongdoing and chose to ignore it? Perhaps Sarah was secretly manipulating Ken. Ken's drastic change was hard to believe, especially given the gentle look he had shown Emily when we first met. It's entirely possible that Sarah was behind it. Various speculations ran through my mind. If no one nearby was on Emily's side, then I had to protect her myself. I continued to call Emily frequently and listened to her talk. Although our discussions about divorce remained deadlocked, I had promised to stay at a hotel near Emily's house after the birth to help her during her postpartum period. I decided to wait until then to try and persuade her directly to consider divorce. Just a little more patience. I repeated this to myself many times. Then suddenly, Emily contacted me.
Mom, the baby has been born.
What? There should have been about a week left until the due date. And to receive such sudden news without any prior warning was extremely puzzling. As soon as I hung up the phone, my husband and I headed to the hospital. According to the doctor, Emily's water had broken suddenly, and labor had begun. Until then, the pregnancy had been progressing smoothly without any issues, but the doctor said she must have been under a lot of stress. Ken immediately came to mind. It had to be the stress from him. Although the baby was born prematurely, fortunately, it was healthy and cried strongly at birth. However, Emily had lost a lot of blood during the delivery and was under observation by the doctor, lying in bed. She couldn't even hold her newborn baby, as multiple tubes connected her to various medical devices. I stayed at a hotel and went to the hospital every day to take care of Emily. Emily's body was gradually recovering, but it seemed it would still be a while before the doctor would allow her to be discharged. One day, while my husband and I were walking down the hospital corridor to visit Emily, we happened to run into Ken coming from the opposite direction. He had probably just left Emily's room. Normally, we would share the joy of the baby's birth, but my irritation grew due to Emily's stories about him. He also seemed inexplicably irritable. Wasn't he happy about the birth of his child? Ken, it's been a while. Congratulations on the birth of your adorable baby. Are you here to visit Emily today? I suppressed my irritation, put on my best smile, and spoke calmly.
Oh, Amanda, thank you for always taking care of Emily. How long does she plan to stay in the hospital? It's been a week since the birth, and she still hasn't been discharged. She must be asking the doctor to keep her in.
Ken's attitude left my husband and me speechless. Ken was a different person from the one we met before the wedding. Thinking about how Emily endured such nasty comments from Ken every day made me even more upset.
Can't you do something about her laziness? She's using pregnancy as an excuse to laze around and avoid housework. And now, she's extending her hospital stay just because it's comfortable. How long does she plan to neglect me?
Before encountering us, he must have bombarded Emily with complaints and sarcasm in the hospital room. Even after that, his irritation hadn't subsided, and he directed his frustration at us.
Ken, that's enough. How can you speak like that? Are you really Emily's husband and the father of your child? Grow up already. Emily is going through a tough time right now. You can take care of yourself. Stop acting like a spoiled child.
My husband, usually calm, had finally reached his breaking point. With an expression I'd never seen before, he glared harshly at Ken. It seemed Ken had never been reprimanded so severely before. He fell silent, his face turning pale, and began to tremble slightly. He looked like a young boy scolded by his parents. He's a weak man who only acts tough around those weaker than himself. That's why he became overbearing as soon as Emily quit her job and lost her income. Emily could never be happy with a man like him. I was certain of this as I headed to Emily's hospital room, glancing at Ken's frightened expression. There was nothing more to say to him. The next day, as usual, my husband and I visited Emily's hospital room in the early afternoon. But when we entered, we were stunned by the unexpected sight. The bed was neatly made, and Emily was nowhere to be seen. We stared at the empty bed for a while. What on earth was going on? Just then, a nurse came into the room and removed the nameplate with Emily's name from the bed. "Excuse me, where did the patient in this bed go?" I asked the nurse hastily. She looked surprised and answered quietly.
This morning, her husband came and took her home. The doctor tried to persuade him to let her stay longer, but he wouldn't listen and insisted on home care.
Ken had ignored the doctor's advice and forcibly taken Emily home. We felt a sense of danger for Emily and hurried out of the hospital. We got into a taxi and headed to Emily's house. Suddenly, my phone rang and I quickly answered. It was Emily.
Mom, help me. I'm at home. I can't stand up because of anemia.
Emily's faint voice was desperate for help. She must have called when Ken wasn't around. We had to save Emily as soon as possible. My husband looked at me and nodded firmly. "Emily, hang on, we're on our way." Ken was likely in a very agitated state. It might be difficult for just the two of us to persuade Ken and rescue Emily. So we contacted Sarah and asked her to come to Emily's house. We briefly explained Ken's recent behavior and Sarah seemed to understand. However, this was a huge gamble for us. Sarah might side with Ken. She could easily take her son's side over us outsiders. But Ken's actions were inexcusable. We couldn't justify forcibly discharging a patient who needed rest for his own selfish reasons. Sarah needed to know this unforgivable reality. The taxi carrying us finally stopped in front of Emily's house. We hurriedly got out of the taxi and stood at the front door. My heart pounded so hard from extreme tension that it felt like it was beating through my entire body. With trembling hands, I reached for the doorknob and pushed it. The door opened with a slight click. It wasn't locked. I signaled my husband with my eyes and entered the house. He nodded and followed me. Suddenly, we heard Ken's shouting coming from the living room.
You're just using childbirth as an excuse to avoid housework. Why don't you hurry up and get discharged so you can be useful to me?
We quickly moved through the hallway and peeked into the living room, only to be confronted by a horrifying sight.
How many times do I have to tell you? Stop sitting around and start working. How long are you going to neglect housework? Even with that face, you won't fool me.
Emily was breathing heavily, her face pale and her eyes so vacant they seemed ready to close at any moment. Yet, she was desperately holding her baby, sitting on the hard floor. Despite Emily's condition, Ken continued to hurl insults at her.
Just lay the baby down somewhere. Think about me first. Take care of me right now.
How could he say this was laziness when Emily looked like she was on the brink of collapse? This situation was far from normal.
Enough already.
My husband couldn't stand it any longer and stepped in front of Emily, glaring sharply at Ken. At the same time, I rushed to Emily and hugged her. Emily, it's okay now. Ken's eyes widened in surprise at our unexpected appearance, and sweat beaded on his forehead, trickling down his cheeks.
What? Who are you people?
His voice shook, unable to hide his agitation, as he stumbled backward. Ken's previously arrogant attitude towards Emily changed completely, and he suddenly became frightened. Ken's true nature was revealed, an overbearing person who only bullied those weaker than himself. How painful it must have been for Emily to endure such treatment. I could never forgive Ken. Just then,
Enough already.
a sudden loud voice startled us, and we turned to see Sarah storming into the living room, her face full of anger. She stopped in front of us and suddenly raised her fist. Was she going to hit Emily? Why did Emily have to suffer even more? I tried to protect Emily, covering her trembling body with mine and closing my eyes. Then I heard a dull thud of something falling. It didn't hurt. Apparently, we hadn't been hit. I cautiously opened my eyes to see Sarah standing tall, and behind her, Ken lay on the floor.
Ouch. Mom, why did you suddenly hit me?
Ken, tears in his eyes, held his cheek and rolled on the floor. What was happening? My husband and I were stunned by the sight. Sarah then turned to us, gasping, and suddenly apologized.
I am so sorry. I had no idea my son's behavior towards Emily was so terrible.
As she apologized deeply, her voice trembled.
If I had been more involved, maybe this wouldn't have happened. My son told me not to contact Emily because she found it burdensome, and I foolishly believed him and refrained from reaching out. I'm truly sorry.
Even as we repeatedly urged her to raise her head, Sarah remained still. Then Emily, summoning her strength, spoke up.
I never said it was a burden. I was very happy when you told me I could talk to you about anything.
It became clear that Ken had also distorted the relationship between Sarah and Emily.
Shut up. Don't say anything unnecessary.
Suddenly, Ken stood up and raised his hand toward Emily. Danger. I moved to shield Emily once more, and my husband tried to restrain Ken, but at that moment, there was a sharp slap. Ken slapped twice on the cheek, collapsed onto the floor, eyes wide in shock, looking up at Sarah.
Mom, what are you doing? Aren't you on my side? I'm your son.
Sarah's hand was trembling. She clenched her fist tightly, struggling to suppress her rising anger.
My son, I don't remember raising such a pathetic man. You are a coward who bullies the weak.
However, she couldn't suppress her anger, and it exploded. Sarah fiercely scolded Ken.
Emily doesn't have her parents nearby to rely on. That's why I told you to support her. How could you let her down like this?
We were astonished by Sarah's words. She hadn't distanced herself from Emily. She was genuinely concerned for her.
Pregnancy is far more taxing on the body than men realize. I repeatedly told you to do as much housework as you could and to let Emily rest after she was discharged, but you ignored everything I said.
Hearing Sarah's words, Emily broke down in tears. It was as if the tension that had held her together suddenly snapped. I gently picked up the baby and helped Emily lie down on the sofa.
And then you forcibly discharged her and demanded she take care of you. Who do you think you are? Can't you do anything on your own? How can someone like you be a father? Get your act together and start over.
Ken, unable to resist Sarah's furious tirade, shrank smaller and smaller. Muttering, I'm sorry," in a small voice.
How could you let Emily, in such a weakened state, sit on this hard floor? You sit there for a while too.
Defeated by Sarah's forcefulness, Ken, exhausted and looking as if his soul had left his body, sat down on the hard floor, staring blankly at one spot. Then my husband, Sarah, and I began discussing Emily and the baby's future. Sarah repeatedly apologized to Emily, promising to do whatever she could to help. Emily then sat up and said, "I'm considering divorce." Her color seemed to have returned, suggesting she was feeling better. As we nodded in agreement with Emily's decision, Ken suddenly stood up and rushed over to her.
You can't be serious about divorce. Please don't say that. I can't live without you.
He quickly changed his tone, as if all his previous insults had been lies.
I can't do this anymore. I hoped you would change after the baby was born, but I'm at my limit.
Emily refused to look him in the eye, shaking her head no matter what he said.
Please, I'm truly sorry for everything. I'll do anything from now on. including helping with the baby and housework. Just don't divorce me.
Ken begged repeatedly, but his plea was not accepted, and he was finally excluded from the discussion. The four of us agreed that Emily would return to the hospital for further care. Once she was well enough to be discharged, she would stay with us for a while.
This house is strangely clean. Despite my absence, everything is so tidy.
Emily remarked while packing for her return to the hospital, tilting her head in suspicion. Indeed, the entire house was impeccably organized. Ken, who couldn't do any housework, couldn't possibly have cleaned so thoroughly. Sarah and I exchanged glances. Sarah repeatedly asked Ken, "You cleaned this place so well," but he remained silent, his eyes darting nervously. He was definitely hiding something. Following his gaze, eyesight was directed at the trash can. In the trash were several crumpled pieces of white paper. I picked them up and smoothed them out, restoring them to their original shape. They turned out to be flyers for a housekeeping service and several business cards from nightclubs with women's names on them. When I looked at Ken, he averted his eyes with a guilty expression.
The passbook that was kept here is missing.
Suddenly, Emily cried out. "What do you mean the passbook is missing?"
Before I was hospitalized, I definitely put it in this drawer. It's a very important passbook. We've been saving every month since we got married for our future child.
When I looked at Ken again, sweat was beading on his forehead, and his eyes shifted to the scattered flyers and newspapers on the table. How transparent he was. I was certain the passbook Emily was looking for was somewhere on that table. I began picking up the flyers and newspapers one by one. Sure enough, the passbook was buried among them. "Emily, is this the passbook you're looking for?" Emily nodded, hurriedly opened the passbook, and checked the balance. Suddenly, her face turned pale, and she collapsed onto the floor.
Why is the balance so low?
It turned out that a large amount of cash had been withdrawn the day after Emily was hospitalized. Of course, the only people who knew the account's PIN were Emily and Ken. All four of us, Emily, Sarah, my husband, and I, fixed our gaze on Ken, who stiffened even more. Under the intense questioning from Emily and our cold stares, Ken finally broke down and confessed. His explanation was incredibly selfish. After Emily was hospitalized, Ken, who had never done any housework, didn't even know how to take out the trash. The house quickly became a mess, and soon it turned into a garbage house. Fearing that Emily would see the mess and think he was incapable, losing his ability to boss her around, Ken hastily hired a housekeeping service to clean the house a day before Emily was discharged. However, the amount withdrawn far exceeded what was needed for the housekeeping service. Upon further questioning, Ken admitted that he had been indulging himself in nightlife, spending vast sums of money at clubs while Emily was in the hospital.
You did what while I was gone? We promised when we got married to save that money for our future children. You only contributed a few $1,000s at the beginning. I've been saving alone since then. Most of the money in that account is mine.
Ken, who had discovered nightlife during Emily's pregnancy, began spending most of his salary at clubs. But when his money ran out, he turned to Emily's savings.
No, you don't understand. I felt lonely, and I knew things would get busy once the baby was born. I just wanted to have a little fun before then. I was planning to return the money.
Ken's desperate excuses were completely unconvincing and only dug him deeper.
Then return it now. You act tall, high, and mighty in front of me, but grovel before my parents. What do you take me for? Am I your maid? You yell at me to do perfect housework, but you can even take out the trash and use my money for housekeeping services. And then you waste a fortune at clubs, basking in attention. How enjoyable that must have been.
Emily's anger grew, and she delivered her final blow.
I was a fool to marry a good-for-nothing like you. From now on, we are strangers. When I get discharged, you'll sign the divorce papers.
Ken turned red and began shouting incoherent words. He scratched his head, looking both confused and terrified, a bizarre sight. The Ken we knew was gone.
You are truly pathetic, as your mother. I'm ashamed of you. What you did is unforgivable. You need to atone for your sins and rebuild your life on your own.
Sarah then promised that, in addition to the compensation we had agreed upon for Emily, Ken would repay the entire amount he withdrew from Emily's savings. Considering Emily's mental and physical suffering, the compensation was substantial, and Ken would also have to repay tens of thousands of dollars. Ken's hardship would continue. But this was the price of his actions, and there was no room for sympathy. Emily's recovery progressed smoothly, and she was discharged a few days after being readmitted. Now she lives with us, adjusting to taking care of her baby and enjoying peaceful days. The divorce was finalized through a lawyer. Ken managed to pay the compensation by scraping together his savings and income from part-time night jobs. However, the repayment of Emily's savings was to be done in installments, ensuring a life filled with work for him. Ken begged Sarah to take him back, but she disowned him, saying, "I have no room for such a disgraceful person." He was forced to live quietly in his house, still burdened with a mortgage. Unable to manage basic tasks like taking out the trash and working late every day, his house began to accumulate garbage once more. It wouldn't be long before it turned into a garbage house again. At work, Ken faced even more challenges. Coincidentally, a colleague's wife had been hospitalized in the same hospital as Emily. The two women supported each other in the same room and enjoyed their time in the hospital. Unaware of this, Ken forcibly discharged Emily against her will. The entire incident was witnessed by his colleague's wife, who then spread the rumor throughout the company. After the divorce, Ken became a pariah at work, avoided by everyone, and subjected to whispers and gossip. Despite this, he couldn't quit because he needed the income to pay the compensation and mortgage. Even though his performance suffered, he had no choice but to cling to his job. It should have ended there, but Ken repeatedly called Emily. Lonely, miserable, and begging to start over. He tried to elicit sympathy, but Emily, now completely recovered, was unmoved. "Don't waste your time calling me. If you have time to spare, work and pay back the money," she would snap at him and then hang up each time. Ken's persistent calls, whether out of loneliness, a desire to escape repayment, or just wanting a maid, remained a mystery. But rather than ponder such trivial matters, we focused on the adorable new life in front of us, enjoying a happy and healthy lifestyle. Emily's baby girl resembled her, and taking care of her felt like reliving our days of raising Emily. I retired from my job, planning to help with the child care and enjoy watching my grandchild grow. Emily, too, motivated by her daughter, was eager to return to work and save money.
Wow, she's already laughing so much. She looks just like you, Emily, and she's so cute.
Even though we cut ties with Ken, we stayed in touch with Sarah through video calls, sharing updates on the baby. Sarah was supportive of Emily's parenting and cherished her granddaughter, maintaining a friendly relationship with us.
I found the cutest outfit the other day. I couldn't resist buying it, so I'll bring it over.
With our granddaughter's half-birthday approaching, we planned a big celebration and invited Sarah, who couldn't visit often due to the distance. We intended to thank her in person once more. Thank you for standing by Emily back then.